Hello, this is a Nutrition CHE210 WebEx optional check-in and exam 1 review session. So if you're watching this recording, I hope it's worthwhile to you. This is live. So if you are here, you can type into the chat or unmute yourself and ask a question or answer a question, either one of those. Okay, exam 1 is coming up. It'll be open from Thursday, February 9th to the end of the day on Saturday, the 11th. The format will be 40 multiple choice questions and 4 free response questions. This exam covers our first 3 chapters in the text and through our MindTap learning platform. It will require you to use Lockdown Respondus browser. At current, about half of our class have downloaded that browser and have used it on the practice quiz. Very important to do that, practice that quiz, and assure that you've downloaded and know how to use that browser for the exam. No excuses, the exam has to be taken with this browser. I'll have some comments on that about what difficulties some people have reported having. Trying to respond right away when someone identifies a problem with getting the browser and using it correctly. So I'll have one slide coming up that might be helpful. To prepare for the exam, obviously have read and have done the MindTap exercise for the first 3 chapters. In addition, there's a study outline posted in additional materials. There's recorded lectures for each of the chapters. To review, 4 exams will count 60% of the grade. 1 of 5 exams will be dropped. MindTap activities, as you see on Blackboard, are giving you a running average, and that's averaging in to a current average in a total weighted average column in Blackboard. 10% is your participation in the approximately weekly discussion board questions. Let's see. So again, if there's any questions as we're going through, type in the chat. I do have that open. I hope I see it if you do, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay, so some comments about questions that some people are having with Lockdown Respondus browser that is required for our exams. And as I said, very important to complete that practice quiz using the Lockdown browser. Some students are reporting it's asking me for a password. I don't have a password. Am I supposed to have a password to do that quiz? No, there's no password. If you do get this window appearing when you're trying to do the quiz, that means you're not opening the quiz with the Lockdown browser. You just went to Blackboard and tried to open the quiz to practice. That's not That's why you're being asked for a password. No, it doesn't require, and the exams will not require a password. What you do need to do successfully is download this lockdown browser following the directions that are shown here. And this is in the announcements. This was an announcement that you click here and it goes through how to download and install the lockdown Respondus browser. When you do have it successfully installed, there's another tutorial that was recorded last semester, I think, that also has me with some students going through issues and how to download Lockdown Browser. This is the very important window that you should see when you're downloading the browser correctly. You should see that it is custom made for our Blackboard at RCBC. If you downloaded Lockdown Browser from anywhere else, then it won't recognize our Blackboard as being the correct one to get to your quiz or tests. So this is how you install it, and then when you have it, this is the icon that might be put on your desktop, or you have a Mac, it might appear on your dock. But you'll see it as an app, just like your other browsers, whatever browsers you use. But for the test and this practice quiz, you need to open Lockdown Browser, and then you'll be able to get to Blackboard and open up, locate the quiz or exam or whatever else that you're doing. Okay. Sometimes there is might be some settings that you have on your particular laptop or computer that need to allow this browser. Sometimes on MacBooks, there's accessibility. You need to give the accessibility to the browser. So I hope this helps for anyone that still might be having trouble. I will remind everybody again, because this exam coming up starting Thursday, that'll be open from Thursday to Saturday. You need to know how to use this browser and have it installed. This additional instructions will, when you open up the exam, there'll be specifics again reminding you that you should have, and you'll be asked to show an ID to show your environment, not be in a darkened room, not wearing a baseball cap, don't have spurious sounds in the background. This is to ensure academic integrity. And for all distance courses such as this one, this is what's being required. It's policy at RCBC. So if you have additional specific questions, either if anyone has a question now, or certainly email me if it helps to meet online. You could do that also. Also, Respondus has they have a help desk that you can call. It says that it's 24/7. So this should be someone that also can help you. Well, that's good to know. Okay, I'm going to present here a bit of an overview, some um, key concepts, things that you're learning, hopefully through the first 3 chapters. You would have seen these already in some of these slides in PowerPoint, or if you watch the recordings that are posted for each chapter. But just to do a review, and then I have example questions, both the open-ended type questions and quite a few multiple choice. It serves as a good review. Try to go through these at a reasonable pace. I do have many, and if you've had enough, you could certainly leave. This is being recorded, and I'll post the recording if you want to listen to it again. These questions that I'll have here, they could be repeated in an exam or something similar to them, but they're supposed to give you an idea of what level of detail you should be able to answer questions at. And I hope that you are getting a lot out, even in the first 3 chapters. Some really good discussion comments I see, even with the first couple of discussions. So that's really nice to see. We do have quite a big class for what's typical. We have a little over 50 students in the class. So it's really interesting to see, to read through some or most of the comments to see what others, your peers, are thinking. There's quite a diverse amount of thinking in the first few discussions. All right, so some 40 essential nutrients that we'll be learning. I did open the last intro session with showing this, and you'll be familiar. If you're not familiar with these, we'll certainly you'll be able to think through these and why they're important, why they're essential. That is, we do not make them ourselves, or don't make enough of these, or don't make them at all and need them in our eating pattern. Really, that last one that came up there, fiber, one of the really underestimated nutrients that need to include in our eating pattern. And especially in chapter 3, some anatomy along with physiology was mentioned, where things happen, where things could potentially interfere with digestion, transport, and metabolism of nutrients. And that GI tract is as it's described, just a tunnel that goes through our body, and we need to bring things from that tunnel into our insides, through our either our lymphs or circulatory system, and get it to places where it can keep us healthy and repair and grow. This is a really nice summary diagram that's in chapter 3. You look at the how we digest things that might be in like a peanut butter sandwich, or it's a nice diagram. So graphic organizer is really important for learning any new material, but this one really is nice. A lot of information there. It's a really nice one to spend some time studying. And it mentions the macronutrients, which we've learned about, and vitamins and where things are absorbed, and some of what happens at the various parts of digestion. So, idea of short answer, short essay, or you could call it free response questions, really come from the goals or objectives of each of the chapters. And if so, that's where they may come from. So here's one: define the dietary guidelines for Americans, the purposes, and what's some roles in politics. So you saw that in the last discussion. There was a video of the presentation of the last dietary guidelines for Americans, the 2020 to 2025, and you may have seen some of the politics involved there. You've seen the guidelines that are being initiated. Things move very slowly. There's plenty of criticism and agreement with these guidelines, but then some of them controversial. There's certainly some politics involved in how they come out and what they say, what they don't say. Describe chemical structures of dietary carbohydrate family. So in the first couple chapters, you get a survey, kind of an oversight of the macronutrients, in which the next few chapters to come look at each of them in more depth: the carbohydrates, the proteins, and lipids, fats, and then we move on to vitamins and minerals. Homeostasis, that's a really important word. There could be certainly ask you, what does homeostasis mean in terms of in nutrition? In this particular question says about glucose. Why is that important? And you heard along the way, glucose is where we get really get all the conversion to ATP, that energy currency. And why is that important? We know about hypo and hyper glycemia. Too much glucose in the bloodstream could be toward bring us toward pre-diabetes or diabetes or insulin insensitivity. How we have these hormones that interact with insulin and glucagon to keep the blood glucose level at a small defined range. If it goes outside of that range, the glucose becomes inflammatory and could start kick off some chronic disease states. So those are some examples. So other open-ended questions could come from these objectives. For instance, here's the objectives from the first chapter: influences on personal choices. And we could think about that. And as you were reading it, you probably thought of which of these factors are most important to your personal eating pattern choices. 6 major classes of nutrients. Well, we mentioned a bunch of them already. So those classes, we'll see that coming up. But the macronutrients is vitamins and water. So we'll see that in the next couple of slides. Explain scientific method. how scientists use various types of research and methods to acquire nutritional information. The scientific method, right? I'm sure everybody is familiar with that, and it was in that first chapter. They, like with any kind of discipline, there are the acronyms, and nutrition has here are the major ones listed under point 1.4. The EAR, the RDA, the AI, the UL, the AMDR, and the EER, and they all should be able to define those and why they're distinct from one another. Assessment methods. How do we assess nutrition? State and deficiencies and excesses. Identify risk factors, explain relationships to chronic diseases. So I have that important slide showing among the top 10 causes of death. 4 of them are pretty closely linked and correlated with nutritional status. Explain, and these, as I say, could have the open-ended questions, something like these, or some from these objectives. The 6 principles of diet planning or eating pattern, A, B, C, D, M, V, if that helps to remember them. That's the acronym. You'll see that coming up. USDA food patterns. So that one of the food patterns is the My Plate idea. That's the evolved from the food pyramid of the past. Compare and contrast labels. So food labels introduced. Should be able to, and you did some exercise interpreting, making use of information on food or nutrition labels. What are the things that should be on a food label? In chapter 3, this had the majority of material that we're going to use going forward in the course. How foods move through the GI tract, and what happens at each kind of station as it goes down. The anatomy of the absorption sites. How do nutrients get absorbed? Where are they routed? We have the routing through the vascular system and through the lymph nodes. Lymph is for lipids or fats and fat-soluble vitamins to a large extent, and gets pulled around because fats, you can't just throw them as they are into the vascular system. They need to be carried along. So do some of the proteins, but they can't just go because they're not water soluble, and that's what our blood is mainly. Hormones and nervous system, so they have to work in concert to have a healthy digestive system. So the 6 major classes: organic, inorganic, and energy yielding, and macronutrient, micronutrient, and you could define each of those on the left column of the 6, which are organic, which are inorganic. Inorganic are the ones that don't have carbon. Energy yielding, that means they get broken down eventually into glucose and used to make ATP, and which are macro and which are micronutrient. So a really good graphic organizer that's presented in the book. The slow rate of most nutrient deficiencies, shown in this graphic from the book. What's happening in the body, and how do we see that? How we diagnose that? And what do we how do dietitians and physicians and healthcare providers evaluate health status related to nutrition? It could be diet history, health history, lab tests, and just physical exams, growth of the body, that sort of thing. So a lot of what's shown is covert things happening in the body when one might be deficient in nutrients, that it's over maybe a long period till they could become overt, to be seen, physical seen. So there are a number of conditions and deficiencies that are very slow. They're chronic in developing, so chronic diseases as opposed to acute conditions that might be observed faster and more clearly. So here's showing in the top 10 causes of death, or percentage of deaths recorded up until 2011. You see heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes in the top 10. All these have relationships with eating patterns. And here's those diet principles for diet eating patterns, healthy eating patterns. ABCDMV. So you might be able to remember that. But definitely will be an open-ended question around something that could be written from this slide right here. And some of these seem like they overlap, but there are distinction enough that we talk about them as individual kind of principles. Food labels, though mentioned early on in the class survey, how many students, how much of the time do you look at food nutrition labels? And so there is plenty of information that's required, at least on packaged foods, and lots of times even on fresh food, it's being put on, like packages of carrots or spinach or broccoli and whatever. But this is important information. Really, the percent of daily value is the valuable thing. We're usually not going to remember how many grams or milligrams or micrograms of things we should have. It's recommended daily. So the percentage of daily value is really important. And then there's this, relatively new, on the front label, highlighting maybe most important kind of information right on the front label to emphasize. This is important to take note of the calories. That's actually kcals, saturated fat, and sodium, sugars, and other. The last two are positive, kind of positive things, right? Potassium is often a deficient in a lot of eating patterns, and so is fiber for sure. Another really great graphic to spend some time studying what's happening, where does it start, which organs, where, on what macro or micronutrient. So important here, the vocabulary important, like having a chyme, and mentioning things like pancreatic juice. And it's just interesting to know where these so important organs are, like the pancreas, kind of sneaky on the stomach there. If you haven't done in biology or somewhere along the line dissection of something, a guinea pig or rabbit or cat or something, you may not know where that pancreas is, but it's such an important organ when we talk about nutrition and metabolism. And of course, the place where a lot of things happen, the upper part of the small intestine, the duodenum is what that region is called, where a lot of enzymes are delivered and a lot of digestion takes place. And then, what happens in the stomach is the gallbladder, really important for squirting in sodium bicarbonate to neutralize what's coming out of the stomach, which is very acidic, low pH. When it gets into the top of the intestine, for enzymes to work, it can't be too acidic. The enzymes won't work properly. So that bicarbonate neutralizes the acidity from the gallbladder. But it comes from the liver. Okay. So in some of the exercise and reading, some of this, you think about this. What's in digestion? Where does that come from? Could think of various things, and how different people might have different reactions to these things. Dairy, too much dairy, fatty foods, too much fatty food, spicy food, corn, red meat, other kind of food allergies that are not completely understood, lactose intolerance. So these are potential causes of indigestion that may not be easy to diagnose or to realize ourselves. Saliva and gastric juice, so important in their areas. Saliva, of course, in the mouth. What role does that play in the mouth? Well, this is a few different roles. Gastric juice, when we're talking about the stomach, and that's hydrochloric acid. That's very acidic, helping digestion of proteins and some lipids, but also the right environment for the enzymes, the protein proteases enzymes, such as pepsin. Another important graphic in the text, which is kind of similar to the figure that we saw earlier, but an important one to kind of look at and think about. For instance, the role of bile. So I did mention gallbladder. Bile is another important thing coming from the gallbladder, but another one produced in the liver. Bile associated with fat digestion because it helps emulsify the fat so that it can be broken down with the lipase enzymes. Important hormones, not many, but these three for sure. you should understand a hormone is sent from somewhere, some organ like the pancreas or the intestine wall that initiates a reaction somewhere else. So gastrin, stomach wall, helps says secrete hydrochloric acid because there's food here. Secretin that responds to acid chyme coming out of the stomach and comes out of the duodenum wall. Originally stimulates the pancreas to put out that neutralizing bicarbonate juices, pancreatic juices. Cholecystokinin, or also called CCK, when there's fat or protein around that needs bile to be delivered. So the CCK stimulates the gallbladder for the bile and the pancreas for the enzymes in the bicarbonate. It's important to recognize we have wonderful feedback loops that turn things off and turn things on, those hormones. And then there's an on-off switch, so that the one we see at the upper left, food in the stomach causes stomach to produce the gastrin to produce the HCl. But when the stomach reaches an acidity of pH 1.5, there's a trigger that shuts off the gastrin. So energy is not used for worthless purpose. You don't want this, the acidity of stomach, you don't want lower than 1.5, so there's a shut off. And there's a few of these mentioned in the text, the main ones. So this is for transport. When we get the food broken down into small enough units to be absorbed, how does it move around? It's either in the vascular system that very importantly goes through the liver, an important place where lots of nutrients are stored, and also to other tissues. We compare that to the lymphatic system, which moves the lipid or the fat-soluble nutrients and moves that until it can be made into a state that could be put into the bloodstream. And you might remember those lymphatic system, and it's different than the vascular system, that there's not a pump like the heart, but it just moves around by what's put into it. It also collects excess fluids that need to be eventually filtered to excrete waste products and things. But for the fat-soluble nutrients, they're made into chylomicrons and eventually then put out into the bloodstream. Okay, involved there's the lipoproteins, chylomicron, the largest one, and then the number of other low density, high density lipoproteins, that are made up of lipid, protein, and cholesterol in different proportions. Okay, we have now a series of multiple choice questions. And if there's something else to add or you have another question regarding these, please speak up. But I'm going to put these up here. They're kind of examples. Some of them could show up on the test, but it's good to think through and see uh, how much you've absorbed, and it's just the kind of question that could be appearing. Characteristic is most typical of chronic disease. How many of these things I just mentioned in this quick review? And so we have a number of these. So typical of a chronic disease as opposed to an acute disease. So chronic is a slow onset. It doesn't necessarily have noticeable symptoms. And but one thing that is true about it is it's a gradual progression. And skills in multiple choice questions, of course, is rule out, quickly go through and dismiss things that you know are not true, not going to be the right answer, and narrow it down to the couple, or if the one jumps out, then go with it. So the thing about the exam is you have the lockdown browser. You need to not look at anything else. You're concentrating and thinking, and you're answering quickly because it's a time test, right? You'll have usually from what I've seen in the past, there is enough time. Some students, maybe a quarter of students, use all the time. But you want to work rapidly so you can have time to review and have time to answer the open-ended with some good, thoughtful replies. The amount of time is usually 90 minutes for the exam, and then it closes. Child develops a strong dislike for noodle soup after she consumes a bowl while sick with the flu. Okay, this is an eating pattern question. And so how is this reaction food related? So it's a negative association that she's developed. And maybe we all have some of these. It's interesting to think about, how we develop our tastes or preferences for food. And if they're say for vegetables, that's not a very good association to not eat vegetables because we had a bad experience. So it's good to analyze sometimes these things. A person who eats a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast every day is most likely, this is based on habit. So we're looking for the best answer. Sometimes one could debate, but we're looking for best answer or answers that appeared in our materials and it discussed it in a certain way. What term describes foods that contain non-nutrient substances whose known action in the body is to promote good well-being, greater extent than contributed by the food's nutrients. Okay, so it's functional. This might be added fiber. It might be construction, something like adding some kind of other natural materials. Fiber is a really big functional food. So there's a kind of a gray line between functional food and a enriched and fortified foods. So those two, enriched, fortified, are addition of a specific nutrient, like vitamin C or vitamin D, that either was destroyed in the preparation of the food, or it's added to the food that it wasn't there before. Okay, that's the difference between fortified food and enriched. Enriched means it was there, we're just adding more, we're enriching it. Fortified means it wasn't there before, we're adding it. Like zinc added to orange juice. Zinc is not in orange juice, but it's being added. It's fortified. What type of nutrient is needed by the body? It must be supplied by foods. Okay, that's an essential nutrient. Essential nutrient is an example of a macronutrient. So there's 3 macronutrients. That's the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Macronutrient, as opposed to micronutrient or trace nutrient, which is organic. So organic means it's carbon-based. There's only one that's carbon-based, and that's vitamin C here. The others are inorganic, meaning do not have carbon. An essential nutrient, this is a variation on a previous question. Essential nutrient is one that it's not synthesized, it's not made in our body, but we cannot make sufficient amount, or we don't make it at all. Our body and our microbiome make some amount of B12, and but we need more from a dietary source, either from animal food, animal source, or supplement, or some lower amounts in other foods, such as beans. So there was you do need to know that how much energy is from each of the macronutrients. Carbohydrate and protein, there's 4 kcals per gram. Fat is 9 kcals per gram. And that's what you'd need to apply here to this question. So a weight reduction calls for a daily intake of 1,400 kcals, which should include 30 grams of fat. What's the approximate percentage of total energy attributed to the fat? Okay, so we just said fat is 9 kcals per gram. So we multiply 30 times 9, right? 270. And then you can estimate, or there's a calculator that's in your browser. It'll be on the top. There'll probably be directions about that, but you won't have to calculate much, but there probably will be 2 questions that involve something around knowing these amount of kcals per gram for the macronutrients. So 270 divided by 1,400. Okay, or what percent is 270 of 1,400? And so even if you kind of did it in your head without a calculator, you might say, oh, sounds like it's around a fifth or 20%. Which statement describes composition of foods. So, and it's as you go through these, it's a mixture of the three energy nutrients. Energy nutrients, another way to say macronutrients. Although most foods are predominantly one or two of those, fat, protein, or carbohydrate. In the overview, vitamins are mentioned, about how many. So there are 9 water-soluble vitamins and 4 fat-soluble vitamins. So that makes 13. 13 known. And as you probably get the feel as you're reading through things, we don't know and understand everything in nutrition. Like many disciplines of science, it's always a moving forward endeavor. That's what science is. And certainly there's more to learn about things like appetite and satiety and adaptation. All these things are really areas of research. The understanding weight control and diabetes and obesity, these are still very active areas of research. Scientific mention, a tentative solution to a problem is called a hypothesis. Certainly be a question related to scientific method, one part of it or another. So this one is, you've been asked, this is related to scientific method. There's a bunch to read here, but you've been asked, this is a way, by a nutrition researcher to conduct a human experiment with vitamin C. As the subjects walk into the lab, you distribute the vitamin C pill bottles to the girls and all of the placebo pill bottles to the boys. The researcher instantly informs you that you have made 2 errors in your research practice. What steps should you have taken to conduct your experiment correctly? So kind of obvious, but so this is some of the possibilities. So obviously there's bias there to girls and boys. That's not a great kind of way to do research. Plus, it's clear that you gave the placebo when you gave the active, you gave the treatment bottle to others. In addition, a good research project, especially a clinical research project, the best is when the actual researcher, the person involved, is also blinded to the treatments. So that's a randomized for sure. That means no bias in selection of the subjects. And clinical trials are best to be blinded, so there's no bias, so rule out bias. So preventing yourself from knowing what are in the pill bottles and distributing them randomly to the subjects. Is also related to research. Increase in exercise accompanied by a decrease in body weight is an example of what? Okay, we're increasing one, we see a decrease in the other. What's the relationship there? It's a correlation, an inverse correlation. It's not It doesn't prove anything yet. It just seems there's a correlation there, and it's an inverse one as opposed to a direct. Direct one would be increase this and the other variable increases, or decrease this and the other variable decreases. The dependent variable decreases. What's the purpose of the recommended diet of dairy allowance and the adequate intake? So when it's known about what is a good amount for individuals, whether that's some age group or just in general, that's a recommended daily amount. Then there's an amount involved. Adequate intake means we're not sure. It's maybe around this much. It's just the science is not there for being as specific. So it's setting nutrient goals for individuals. Which statement is true about nutrient intake? Okay, we have a bunch of acronyms here. Estimated average and RDA, and the only one that's correct here is the intake above the upper limit could put an individual at risk. Percentages of calories from fat, protein, and carbohydrate. Well, that's what the AMDR are. Maybe the acronym that's hardest to remember what it means: acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. And for fat, this is 25 to 35. The carbohydrate is the 55 to 65, and the protein is the 10 to 30. Good to know those numbers. The sequence of developing a nutrient deficiency. It's slow. Remember that, and it's that first the intake is inadequate, then there's some abnormal functioning that might be apparent, it might not be happening in the body, and then after some period of time, it might be long period of time, such as if there's inadequate amount of calcium over a long period of time, or vitamin D, then osteoporosis might develop over decades. It might not be realized until someone takes a little bit of a fall and seems to have an exaggerated kind of fracture, a broken bone or such, and then realize, wow, they've been deficient in these nutrients over a long period of time. Unless a physician or a dietitian recommends a DEXA scan to look at the strength of or weakness of bones. Appropriate person for nutrition information might be best, most appropriate. It might be the dietitian. Now, you might think medical doctor. Well, it may not be the case. Medical doctors, depending on where they've gotten their training, may not have had any formal nutrition education, and they might have learned it on their own. They might be very good at it, but the registered dietitian really has the most formal training. Diet principle that provides all fiber, energy, and amounts sufficient to maintain health. Well, so that word sufficient is similar to adequate. So that's what that is. And So it's good to know the differences among these terms, and you can see how each is distinct. Okay, a big concept, nutrient dense, and that's where you get the most amount of nutrients. That is vitamins and minerals and fiber relative to calories. Right? So a better ratio of nutrients to calories is more energy dense. Whoops. Uh, two major nutrients in the fruit group. So there was an overview of vitamins in the chapter 2. Just a brief overview. We'll go into them much more in depth. But vitamin A and C. So interestingly, these are should be able to associate with fruit. Protein and calcium. Well, you might associate that with dairy. B vitamins and iron. Well, that also could, that's maybe vegetables. D and E, you might think of avocados or something, because these are fat-soluble vitamins. Fish oils, so fish, seafood. This is just mentioned somewhere along the line. Food lists, exchange lists. These are in control or treatment of diabetes. Addition of calcium to orange juice. This is fortifying because it wasn't there before. It's a good, definitely will be a question related to the distinction between fortifying food, that is putting a nutrient in where it wasn't there naturally, but it's there to fortify that food with some additional nutrient. Whereas enrich means to, it's there, but to bump it up a little bit, to enrich it, right? So it may have been lost in preparation if it's a prepared food, and it's replacing it or increasing it by a bit more. Which of these need to be on a label? Required to be on a packaged food label. So all these others are trace nutrients. It's these are more often nutrients of concern, so that's why they're put on a label. %. What do food labels express nutrient content as? And that's daily values. That's the easiest for kind of us to understand. We're quickly looking at a nutrition label on a food product. Process that we break down food to absorbable components, digestion. These others are processes, but digestion is the right term there. Chyme. So a weird word. It might be the first time you see such a word. It's this semi-liquid mass, partially digested food coming out of the stomach into the small intestine. Function of mucus. Function of HCl in the stomach. Bile. What does bile do? emulsifies that to get it into a form that could go into a water-based system, and that's the bloodstream. The class of nutrients required, the least amount is we don't really require these really at all, but it doesn't require much digestion at all. In fact, the digestion might all take place right in the mouth from salivary enzymes in the saliva. Intestinal villi crypts, so some anatomy that we need to have learned in chapter 3. Microvilli, what happens there? That's transport. So the villi have some enzymes to do that last bit of digestion, and then we have smaller projections that do the absorption. Lots of surface area, that's what these villi provide. To assist the process of digestion absorption, it's usually best to, yes, combine foods. Often there's a synergistic effect between some foods, for instance, fat-soluble vitamins with more of a fatty food. That's usually where they're from. And fiber. Fiber also often enhances absorption. Most metabolically active organ. So the liver does a lot of storage. There's a lot of processing of carbohydrate, makes glycogen to store. It then sends out minerals and other nutrients to other parts of the body. Primary role of the normal thriving intestinal bacterial population. Which substance is known to be produced by intestinal bacteria? So you can rule out some of these. Mucus, that's along the intestinal wall, and this is the semi-processed, semi-digested food. Glucose, that's a breakdown, the final, to go into the ATP production, vitamins. There's some bacteria that make certain vitamins, such a small amount of biotin, some B12, and some vitamin K. The two systems that coordinate work hand in hand, all digestive and absorption processes. Okay, that's both nervous and endocrine. So nervous system, that each of our parts of our GI tract sense and send signals to organs, but also endocrine, that involves the hormones. Which substance? So here's our, among our 3 most important digestive hormones, which one stops the or controls the release of HCl to prevent excess? We saw that in a negative feedback system, and that's the gastrin. So think about what do you know about each of these very important digestive hormones? The carbohydrate release from the pancreas, which one signals that? That's the secretin. And the fat cells, the fat, we're trying to digest fat, what, in the intestinal wall, what's released, which of the hormones, that's cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin stimulates release of enzymes, and bile, indicating that there's fat and protein to be digested. Blood sugar or dextrose. It's also synonymous with glucose. Maltose is a disaccharide. So we do more with this in chapter 4. So this question I didn't cover in chapter 3. In which of the tissues is glycogen typically stored? Again, this one is just highlighting it may have been mentioned, but we talk more about it in chapter 4. Won't see this question in this exam. But glycogen is storage of glucose in the muscle and liver. Cellulose, pectin, hemicellulose, and lignin. So this again, have some chapter 4 questions here. So this one is chapter 4. This is a description of fibers. Again, so these last few are chapter 4. So don't have to worry about these now. But glucose falls, what pancreatic hormone is secreted to stimulate the release of glucose? Okay, so glucose falls, and we want to release more glucose, usually from the liver, or from muscle, and it's stored as glycogen. It's glucagon. It's good to get these vocabulary words that might be not familiar to you. Good to take notes of them somewhere. There's also in MindTap, there's a way to make, and there already are flashcards that are pretty good to go through to help you study. Glycemic index, we'll talk about this in chapter 4, but this is a way to rank foods in the way, how quickly does the glucose from the foods get into the bloodstream. The potential to increase blood glucose, that's the glycemic index of a food. So this is just looking ahead a little bit. Which form are dietary lipids found? So these are triglycerides. That's what most of dietary lipids are, triglycerides, and we learned about this in the chapter after carbohydrates, I think chapter 5, triglycerides. It's three fatty acids on a backbone of glycerol. Okay, so that was a run through some questions, some example questions, both multiple choice and open-ended questions, just as a flavor for the type of questions you'll see on the exam, and any other specific questions you might have, especially with if you have issues, still remaining issues with the lockdown respondus browser, or with MindTap in general, please don't hesitate to contact me so we can straighten that out quickly.